Welcome to episode 251 of the Ski Podcast, and thanks for joining us today. This week, we're going to be looking at a different type of ski resort where there are no lifts and the only skiing on offer is ski touring. We're also going to be asking what should be on Rob Katz's to-do list as he takes up the reins again at Vail Resorts, as well as finding out about skiing in locations as unlikely as Mississippi and Tennessee. We also have snow reports from Australia and New Zealand, plus your feedback, and I'll be sharing details of a very special episode coming up soon. Now, my name's Ian Martin. I'm delighted to be joined by two guests in the studio today. Firstly, for her fourth time on the show, having most recently featured talking about the Grove in episode 214, I'm delighted to be joined by journalist Sam Haddad. Hi, Sam. How are you?
Hi, Ian. Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me again. Good to be back.
No, you're local to me, a little bit down the road, but we were talking in the green room earlier. I think we both have in common that we got into the sea this morning.
Yeah, it's so lovely at the moment, isn't it? So sort of well, we had a kind of windy weekend, didn't we? But it's so nice to have it kind of calm and be back in again. No waves though, unfortunately, for the surfers. Like that's kind of annoying.
No waves for the surfers, but I took my paddleboard down this morning, and it was just about enough swell to kind of keep you honest on the water. And also joining us for the second time after his debut in episode 235, I'm so pleased to be able to welcome back the expert on skiing in America, a host of the Storm Skiing podcast, Stuart Winchester. Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ian. Thanks for having me back.
And now we are recording at midday today in the UK, but what is the time for you? I think you've made quite an early start for our behalf.
Yes, 7 a.m. here in the city on the East Coast of the United States. But that as I was telling Sam earlier, is the productive time when everyone else is still asleep and get lots done.
Yeah, and exactly whereabouts are you, Stuart?
Brooklyn, New York.
Excellent. One of my favourite places. Cool. Well, if you've both been on the show before, you might well know that one of the ways I like to start off the show is to ask my guests where they skied and snowboarded last. So, Sam, when and where would that have been for you?
So I went to Oz-en-Osson, which I might have mentioned before, the kind of satellite of Alpe d'Huez. We go with quite a few family and friends from time to time, and I went there in February half term. I was also meant to be going to Cairngorm Mountain for the Up Battle. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's the split board kind of uphill race that I've really wanted to kind of watch. Leslie McKenna wins I think every year, actually, not even most years. And I really wanted to go. It's a really rootsy festival. I was meant to be doing a piece for Hook magazine there, but unfortunately they didn't have enough snow this year, so I didn't go up. They cancelled the event. So that was a shame.
Right. Unfortunately, I did read a post on Facebook the other day by, I think, Skimo Scotland or something like this, and it was talking about the history of the different events they had scheduled. And I think we're saying 10 years ago they had 5 events scheduled and they ran 5. This year and the last couple of years, they've only had 2 events scheduled and they've been able to run 0 to 1 of them. It is a bit of a challenge, pretty disappointing. Were you considering taking part yourself?
I'm not probably fast or technical enough, but I don't know, a voice in my head also would have wanted to. So I think in a fun way, I probably would have done. But yeah, like they've had a bad season, haven't they? And I feel like, I just feel really sad for the community up there because it's such a sort of integral part of kind of life up there.
And you mentioned Oz, that is links into the Alpe d'Huez ski area, is that right? So did you do a bunch of your skiing in Alpe d'Huez while you were there?
Yeah, we did. It's so great to go over there. I think I did the Sarenne. It was kind of nice sunny weather for Feb, as it often is in Feb. So I did the Sarenne. We did the Sarenne like every day, probably twice a day, and had picnics. So that was lovely in terms of keeping things affordable on the side of the mountain. And you can also get quite high. It goes up to 3,300, I think. So the snow was good up top.
Cool. I think we've covered that before, but just for listeners who don't know, the Sarenne is a very long black run that goes off. Is it called the Peak Blanc at the top?
Yeah, and it's genuinely beautiful. Like every day, like I would kind of stop and like say to everyone, the kids remind them, although they just kind of didn't really need reminding. There are views on every turn. Really, really is beautiful. I kind of came home still dreaming talk about it. Yeah, it was great.
Is that the one where you have to go through a tunnel to access it at the?
No, you can go the tunnel route. Actually, because it was quite icy and mogully, we actually didn't fancy that. But you can come around the other side, so you kind of don't have to. Like it is called a black, but none of it is particularly challenging. I think it's just the length of the run that is probably why they call it a black. Slightly steep at the top, but fine generally.
Oh, well, I have done it years ago. I should probably refresh my memory and try that again. Stuart, you spent a lot of your time on snow during winter. I guess I might ask you, as well as when and where you were on snow last, how many days you got in last winter as well?
Yeah, so I clocked in 54 days. I hit 59 ski areas, and a lot of those were small ones that I hit a bunch in a day in the Midwest United States. So I plan all my trips in advance because I try to hit as many different areas as possible in a year. And a lot of times what that means is that I have bad conditions and I end up lucking out about 10 days a year. And this year I really didn't get any snow anywhere I went until my last trip, which was the first week in May. And I went to Arapahoe Basin in Loveland in Colorado. And for your listeners, those are two of the highest ski areas in the United States. The base area is around 10,000 feet, so a little over 3,000 meters. And they got 2 feet of fresh snow. I was skiing powder on May 7th, May 8th. It was beautiful. And there's a little bit of the tree line is quite high in the U.S. In Colorado, the tree line's around like 11,000 feet, so close to 4,000 meters. But there's a few ski areas that pop up above tree line, and Loveland and Arapahoe Basin are two of those.
Oh, I mean, that sounds great. I am remarkably inexperienced as far as skiing in North America is concerned, but Arapahoe Basin is actually one of the 2 resorts that I've skied there, and I
Nice.
really liked it there. It kind of reminded me of Grand Monte in Chamonix. Got a big bowl with lots of skiing and not many lifts serving it. I mean, it was a few years ago while I was there, but it has that edgy kind of feel to it, I think.
Yeah, lots of hikeable stuff above the lifts where you can really get in trouble if you want to. Steep.
Yeah, and going towards the end of the season, it's often Arapahoe Basin and Mammoth that are the 2 areas that stay open really late.
There's several. So Mammoth stays open, July, August. Palisades Tahoe up in Lake Tahoe will stay open often, just as long. Up in Oregon, Timberline Lodge is famous for, they could probably do skiing all year if they wanted to. They often go into September. They do a lot of free ride camps there in the summer. Snowbird in Utah will often go to July 4th. Loveland, right next to A Basin, goes to early May. And you have a few other places that push the season as late as they can. I think those are the biggest players. And then on the East Coast, you have several who make it into May, Killington being the one who makes it into June sometimes.
And you mentioned, that you plan your trips in advance. I'm like that as well. Spontaneity isn't too easy to fit into my calendar. Maybe, when my kids get older, at some point that will become more straightforward and I'll be able to just follow the map like Mike Richards, who's often on the show. His phrase is, if it's snowing, I'm going, but I've not really been in that position yet. So I'm a bit like you. You plan your trips, and if you're lucky, you get some amazing snow. And, a couple of years, it's kind of worked out a bit, the best being Verbier a few years ago. But I think maybe like Sam had a trip up to Scotland planned and the different trips I've had. But for me, and well, from what I know about you, it's the same for you. It's being in resort, being in the mountains and discovering these places where the joy lies.
Yeah. And for me, I just really need to understand, how does the mountain work? How does the mountain flow? I'm specifically concerned with lift served skiing. There's a lot of backcountry folks here in the US. I don't care about that at all. I like to be, if I hurt myself, I want to be in bounds where there's ski patrol. So I like to see things like, oh, you have to walk uphill to the lift there, or this trail doesn't quite get back over to this side of the mountain. That's the context I like, because I care mostly about the experience of skiing and how the mountain is set up. I look at a ski area as a work of art. So man putting his impression on the mountain and creating a place like a park for skiers to enjoy.
Sure. Well, it'll be interesting a little bit later on where we discuss how Vail Resorts fits in with the concept of ski resorts being a work of art, but we will come on to that. Just now, there is skiing going on. We've mentioned in different places around the world just now. But in our last episode, we heard from Rachael Oakes-Ash from the Snowsbest website about all the news in Australia and New Zealand. And I asked if any of our listeners would like to send us in a report. And Guy Beatson got in contact. So let's have a listen to his update from New Zealand.
Hi everyone, Guy here with the New Zealand ski update. It's been a bit of a mixed bag here in New Zealand this week. Down on the South Island, things are looking good. Mount Hutt is enjoying some fresh snow, with around 90% of terrain open and groomed trails in great shape. Over near Queenstown and Wanaka, Coronet Peak, the Remarkables and Cardrona are also skiing nicely. Cardrona's groomers especially are proving popular. Exciting news also from Cardrona. The much-anticipated Arapahoe Basin is open to skiers for the very first time. That's adding plenty of new terrain and fresh runs to explore. Advanced riders are now heading to Treble Cone with the Saddle Basin open, although it's still early season. Further north, Mount Dobson, Round Hill and Ohouse snowfields are still making the most of recent clear skies. Mount Dobson has a solid base on its groomers and shaken off the rime ice on its lifts from earlier in the week. Round Hill has got good coverage and has been running the longest rope tow in the South Island for the first time this season. Up on the North Island it's been tougher. Heavy rain at Mount Ruapehu has washed away some early season snow at both Turoa and Whakapapa, leaving only the Happy Valley learner slope at Whakapapa running. Looking forward, the forecasts, however, look promising, with significant snowfalls predicted over the next 2 weeks. Hopefully we'll see more terrain opening soon. And that's the New Zealand ski update for now. Back to you, Ian.
And in addition to that, Rachael also sent us this update on the latest conditions in Australia.
Thanks, Ian. Australia's definitely having a great season so far. It's a month since we launched the opening weekend with a 70-centimetre snowstorm. That's since been followed up with 2 more snowstorms in June and obviously some rain, but let's not talk about that. And now we're into July with 3 weeks of forecast storms ahead. Resorts are in the midst of a snowstorm today, Thursday, that will definitely push this week's storm totals to well into the 40s or so, with another storm coming through on Monday next week. Now, in typical Aussie style, winds are a blizzard problem, which will mean no doubt chairlifts on wind hold, but this Saturday is likely to be a day of the season for sure. The second half of July is going to potentially create record snow-based numbers across the Aussie board, but let's not jinx it. There are 3 storm cycles disclosing themselves over the next 2 weeks. If they come to fruition, then it is game on. All Aussie resorts have all their terrain open. Perish's new $26 million chairlift, the Mount P6, is now fully operational. Hotham has a new terrain park on the Big D. Mount Buller has an Aussie-first therapy dog in training on the slopes with Ski Patrol. And snowboard legend Scotty James is hitting up Thredbo in August to ride with the kids in Mookie's mini pipe.
So that's the state of skiing down under at the moment. Now, Sam, I wanted to have you on the show because back in January, I read your article in The Guardian about a place called Homeland in Italy. Now, I had come across it before, but as far as I know, you're the first Brit to visit, certainly the first piece I read about it, and I wanted to find out a little bit more. Perhaps you could tell us what makes Homeland different from other ski resorts, and listeners won't know, but I'm kind of putting that in inverted commas.
So just to clarify, Tristan Kennedy, one of my good friends, had actually written about Homeland before. He did a piece in the FT. I don't want to totally claim all the credit for that, but I was going there with a family angle, so I was taking my son along. But what really interested me was the fact that it's a ski touring focused resort. Well, that's kind of all there is. There's basically a shipping container where you can rent out your split board or your ski touring skis, and other than that, it's just a load of stone houses that are kind of used by hikers in the summer. Certainly when I went there in January, the one hotel wasn't open. So you're kind of driving into this mad, beautiful ghost town. There's a frozen lake and it kind of opens up like this amphitheatre, kind of all these runs fanning out kind of in the distance. It just really appealed to me, this kind of different side. As you know, I write about the climate crisis for my newsletter, Climate and Board Sports, and how that is affecting the snow sports industry. So I'm really interested in places where people are trying to be a bit innovative. They're not kind of being too doom and gloom. They're like, we're going to adapt. We want to keep people doing this stuff. How can we change so that can still happen?
Well, you've anticipated one of the things that I've written in my script about your Substack called Climate and Board Sports, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Was it your interest in sustainability that led you to Homeland then?
Yeah, it was primarily. I mean, I am also someone that likes splitboarding. As I've gotten older, I do really like that sort of time on the mountain, that earning your turns. I couldn't have imagined when I was younger I would have ever been someone that enjoyed the hike up more than the run down, but there's definitely the kind of reality for me. But I'm also probably someone who likes to do that with a guide, because I live in kind of, Brighton. I don't have enough access to the mountains to really get my knowledge up to that level. So I'm someone that would rather, take a day and kind of do that. And Homeland is really set up for that at quite an affordable price. So I think it was €125 to hire a guide for the day, which felt reasonable.
Was this area ever a ski resort with lift served ski areas, or is it an entrepreneurial venture to just try and develop it as a ski touring destination?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. So it was a very kind of rudimentary ski resort. I'm actually want to say the 70s and the 80s, but that could be wrong. Back in the day it has been, but then it wasn't for a long time. There's no ski infrastructure that you can see there now. Because the pass goes into Switzerland, it's like an old trade route. So people used to cross and kind of, smugglers used to go. So there's quite a lot of interesting history around that. And in the summer, as I mentioned, it's a big area for hiking. I think that it was more some people from Milan had this idea that they were very into the outdoors. And so they approached the mayor with this idea of how can we make use of this place that is kind of just sitting empty. Like some tourists would go there independently, but it wasn't what I would call accessible touring. Like you really needed to have that deep knowledge yourself. Whereas I think this is a way where you're saying, if you're a good skier, you don't need to be an excellent or expert skier, but you do need to be good and have a decent level of fitness. You can actually go there and have your first taste of touring, or you can be someone who's toured before and then you're going there just to try some new routes.
Is this something that came out of the pandemic, out of COVID? Because we obviously saw a huge interest in ski touring around that time when the lists were closed for 1.5 seasons. Did it come out about after that?
Yeah, it definitely came into that. I think that they noticed that a lot of people were independently kind of going and touring in this area because it's got this walking pass. I know that's actually a road in summer. So there's kind of quite an easy, natural way where you could just follow the snowy road. But then there's lots of other routes kind of aside from that. But then it was also, I know that you've mentioned Madesimo in past articles, but the main lift, the kind of, if you like, the top Grand Montet type lift at Madesimo has been out of action for a while. So I think the free riders were looking for somewhere to go, but also the mayor of Madesimo was also thinking, because it's part of the same province, like how can we diversify our offering? Building a new lift is very expensive. Artificial snow is very expensive. 90% of Italian resorts are dependent on artificial snow in some form. When I went there, it was for New Year, and it hadn't snowed in 2 weeks, and it had been really warm. There was a high pressure sitting over the Alps, and they were getting pummeled with snow kind of further south. It's part of just accepting the reality of where we are, but tied into those things that people enjoyed in the pandemic.
It's funny, I can tell you're a journalist because you're running through all of my questions that I've prepared before I've even had a chance to ask them. But you mentioned Madesimo then. So maybe you could just clarify, whereabouts is the Homeland ski touring area?
Yeah, so it's in the Lombardy region of the Alps. It's 2.5. So Madesimo is 2.5 hours drive from Milan, which is a nice drive, takes you up past Lake Como, or it's a nice drive at the end. And then you kind of wind your way up. And Madesimo is 15 minutes from Homeland. So I think a lot of if they're realistic about their offering, I think they're kind of saying, we expect people to stay in Madesimo, have a nice ski holiday, and maybe come for a day to Homeland to kind of explore there and get a taste for kind of ski touring. But then from February onwards, you can actually stay in a hotel in Montespluga, which is kind of the end of the valley, if you picture it. You kind of stop off at Madesimo, and if you kept driving, this would be the end of the road because that pass is closed during winter because of the snow.
That's really interesting. I'll put a link. We had Mike Richards, who I mentioned earlier, who went on one of his last-minute trips to Madesimo. He reported on that in episode 165. I'll put a link to that in there. And it's interesting. Do you think then, so this is Madesimo maybe looking to cover themselves for some of the threats that we see from climate change, giving them some kind of diversification as a different product to offer?
Yeah, it's 100% that. Yeah, with an eye to the future, the guide that took us out said that he's taken lots of people from French ski resorts and other Italian ski resorts. I think this is something that a lot of people that are running ski resorts are looking at with interest and thinking, yeah, is this how it's going to look in the future? Because, of course, you can hike to where the snow is good. You're not dependent on a particular piste. So, like I said, it hadn't snowed for 2 weeks, but we still got some fresh turns in. There were bits of grass on other areas that were quite kind of visible, but the beauty of touring is, I can't go up that way, I'll just go up the other way. So it kind of does lend itself to that kind of product, and just people being more sporty, more outdoorsy these days. Perhaps it's less about those kind of 2-hour lunches. They still have their place, but I think people want to bring a bit of fitness. I know looking at my friends, there's a lot of wanting to bring fitness into your holiday too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can tell you that, even my wife, who certainly would never have considered ski touring before, is really keen to try it now, probably because I keep banging on about it. But you went as a family trip and with your son, I think you said.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard for me to imagine how my children would get on ski touring. How did he find it?
So yeah, he is a runner, just to clarify. So he does, his tolerance for endurance is kind of fine. I think the younger one, although he runs also, would have been a bit less enthusiastic, but this one does like walking. So I suppose if parents are thinking, would this be suitable for my kid, it is probably, you probably want your child that doesn't moan on a long walk to be the kind of one that goes with you. And yeah, he took to it well. I think he enjoyed the kind of, trying to stay on the guide's tail. He's like a teenage boy, so I think that kind of competition appealed to him. What was quite interesting though was when we switched over to touring skis, or I was on my snowboard. He's like a confident skier. He's been lucky enough to go since he was little, and he found those touring skis. That first turn that he dug in, he like totally stacked it. And I think for his ego, I don't know if he'd like me saying, I think he was a bit like, "What's this about? Oh, my mum's just going down," because obviously on a snowboard it's easy, and I've done more touring than him. So the guide had to just explain there was a bit of different weight distribution. And then he got to handle it, and by the end he was completely loving it. So yeah, that was fine.
Well, it sounds like a great outing. And you skied in Madesimo as well while you were there. What did you think of that ski area?
Yeah, we really liked it. I really wanted that top lift to be open. I spent a lot of time looking at that. And as I do when I'm in Chamonix at Grand Montet, you're just like, oh, I really want to get to that stuff. And unlike Chamonix, it didn't seem hikeable, certainly for someone with my level of sort of touring. It was kind of, cliffs. It looked a bit more like Le Grave. I imagined a bit more like it would be hiking up to Le Grave. The lift does a lot of the work in getting you up to those higher peaks. But I really enjoyed it. I loved, all the Italians were lovely. The food was reasonable and great. And as someone who goes to France a lot, and I really love the French, as I felt in terms of value for money and the tastiness of the food that we were getting, I thought it really delivered to like a high level. And because we were near Milan, I was worried that it might be a bit fashionista-y, and it wasn't at all. It was very down to earth, and it was really great.
Yeah, I think they're all the fashionistas from Milan and Turin heading to either Courmayeur or Cortina. I don't think Madesimo is quite as fashionable as that. And as someone who went on 3 trips to Italy, maybe 4 trips to Italy last winter, I went to Courmayeur, Dreizehnen, Selva Val Gardena, and Mount Etna as well. And you really do notice the difference in terms of the costs. I think when you're in Italy, across the board, if you compare it to France, where I typically spend most of my skiing, it's 2/3 of the cost if you're eating out or something like that. That's what you found in Madesimo area?
Yeah, 100%. And really, really high quality food. Like they had a kind of buffet style lunch with their kind of regional, it's a macaroni cheese type thing. It was so good. And yeah, it was probably the best mountain food I've had in terms of value for money. Like not a kind of gourmet experience in terms of, sitting with fancy waiters and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure that I require that or really want that, to be honest. I just want to get back on the mountain. So. For
sure. But, the food in Italy is definitely one of the highlights. Well, I'm going to put all the links to Homeland in there. That's really interesting. Thanks very much for that, Sam. I'm going to turn to Stuart now, if that's okay. I mentioned you're host of the Storm Skiing podcast, but you also have your very own successful, incredibly well-written Substack, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. And I love the strap line that you have there, which is, everyone's searching for skiing soul. I'm trying to find its brains. When did you come up with that one, Stuart?
So when I was learning to ski in the 1990s as a teenager, most of my ski information would come from magazines. And magazines would have a very resort-centric focus, as in, here's a week I spent in Vail. Here's my trip to Mad River Glen in Vermont, and making that the adventure. What happened as the magazines faded is that ski media way overcorrected to what I call stoke, which is basically bros jumping off things and hiking out into the middle of the Himalayas to places that are just not accessible or relatable. It's cool to read about and it's fun. This became de facto the signs of real skiers, right? Was people who could jump off 100-foot cliffs and do flips or go way out of bounds on a track. I don't care about any of that. And neither do most people. 99% of skiers spend 99% of their time skiing off a lift at a ski area. no matter how much media attention backcountry and touring is getting. So what I cared about, and what most skiers, I believe, care about, is the experience of skiing at a ski area. And what happened, because no one was covering ski areas anymore, they were just covering athletes jumping off things, is we had a lot of bad information, because social media is a very high passion, low information environment. And people would just speculate on why Vail was putting this lift here, or Killington was closing this terrain on this date. So I said, well, what if I, as a journalist, just talk to the people running the resorts and ask them? So that's the logic there.
Oh, well, it makes sense. I love your summary of social media there. High passion and low information. That's definitely how it works. Now, when you were last on the show in episode 265, we had a really interesting conversation about all the different collective passes that are out there, the Icon Pass, Indy Pass, Mountain Collective Pass, and, which one I've left until last, the Vail Resorts Epic Pass. Our last episode, 250, Rachael was discussing how the Epic Pass is making a difference in Australia, where they own 3 resorts outright, I think. So, I mean, maybe perhaps the best place to start off with, just in case listeners might not be aware, would be, could you give us a brief history of the Epic Pass?
Yeah, so Vail launched the Epic Pass for the 2008 season. At the time, they had 5 ski areas. They had Vail, Beaver Creek, Breckenridge, and Keystone in Colorado, and Heavenly, which straddles the Nevada-California border, right in the shores of Lake Tahoe. Spectacular ski area. So the price of a Vail Mountain, just Vail Mountain season pass for the 2007 to 8 ski season had been somewhere around $1,900. For the 2008 to 9 ski season, Vail introduced the Epic Pass, which was $550, or maybe even a little less, for unlimited access to all 5 of its mountains. So no one knew what to do with this. This was incredible. This was a revolution as far as putting all of your premium mountains on one pass for a low price. Then Vail started to add more ski areas. They bought North Star out in Tahoe to complement Heavenly in 2010. And then they surprised everyone. They started buying little ski areas around places like Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Chicago, Illinois, and Detroit, Michigan, where you have large populations, small hills, 200 vertical feet, and tons of lifts, all snowmaking, hardly any natural snow. But what they were doing is they were saying, if you live in the Detroit area, which 5 million people do, buy the Epic Pass, ski at Mount Brighton for a warm-up, take your vacation at Vail Mountain. And they continued to build on that. They started to buy in Australia around 2014, I believe, with Perisher. And they added Hotham and Falls Creek in 2019. And then they grew into the Northeast United States with Stowe Mountain in 2017. And now they have 42 ski areas all across the world. Their latest 2 they bought were in Switzerland, Andermatt, Sedrun, and Crans, Montana. So now you can ski all of those unlimited on the Epic Pass, which is around $1,000 early bird price in March. It's more than that now.
Right. And, we've covered Crans, Montana, Andermatt on the podcast before. And so we saw this big growth. It makes sense. We talk about skiing in Vail for the season being $1,900, and then it comes down to less than a third of that price. It's clearly going to be popular. It sold really well to start off with. But I think it's fair to say that last winter was not a great winter for Vail Resorts and for Epic Pass. Am I right in saying that sales were down for the first time for the Epic Pass since it launched in 2008?
That's right. Yeah, sales decreased for the first time ever. It wasn't a huge decrease, but they had always gone up, typically by double digits up until the last couple of years. And this was the first drop in the history of the Epic Pass. And to underscore that this was more of a Vail problem than an industry problem is that skier visits at Vail Mountains declined 3% this year. Skier visits in the United States overall were up 3% this year. So there was a big differential with Vail Resorts going down, the rest of the industry going up. So at some point you have to say, okay, where's the traffic from everywhere else coming from? And Vail accounts for about 20% of US skier visits. So clearly people are leaving Vail Mountains to go to other competitors.
And I say that on your Substack in your blog, there's a lot of data on there. I mean, it's fantastic the way that I'm a data person. I love a spreadsheet. I love some graphs, and you've got some fantastic ones on there to do with the growth and the visitation, etc. And I said that last winter wasn't a good one for Vail Resorts. Evidently, they're running contrary to the trend in the States. But in addition, or perhaps because of that, many listeners will have heard of the ski patrol strike that happened in Park City. That was, broadly speaking, regarded as a PR disaster for Vail Resorts. Do you think that's fair to say that?
It is, and it was for a number of reasons. And in many ways, it was self-created. Let me put it this way. The sort of people who can afford to spend a week in Park City during Christmas break are probably the same sort of people who have jobs like financial analyst for Wall Street firm covering Vail Resorts. You're looking at probably a $20,000 week for a family to go out during the holidays. And exacerbating this is Park City is surrounded by other ski areas, world-class ski areas, Deer Valley, Snowbird, Alta, Brighton, Solitude. So you can always see directly what they're not doing by looking around them. So every other ski area around them had a lot more terrain open, a lot more lifts open, and understandably so, because they had full ski patrol. But one of the things that really killed them, so a peak day walk-up lift ticket at Park City this season was $328. So that's what they were charging during Christmas week. And ostensibly, Vail cuts off ticket sales on peak days when volume and conditions merit it. So they're still charging $328 for a mountain that was something like 30% open. I have a tweet with all the stats from that day and screenshots. So these are rough numbers, but right next door at Deer Valley, it was still expensive, but they at least had a full mountain open. And you had very long lift lines and not a lot of terrain open and very frustrated people. Yes, it was very badly handled by Vail. And the total cost of what Patrol was asking for is not that great compared to the damage it did.
Therefore, perhaps it wasn't so surprising that in May of this year, the CEO of Vail Resorts, Kirsten Lynch, resigned. So I guess my first question is, did she jump or was she pushed?
I don't know. None of that has leaked. And I would speculate that she was asked to resign and given that opportunity to save face.
Okay, well, she was replaced by a guy called Rob Katz. Now, that name might ring a bell with listeners because he was CEO of Vail Resorts for 15 years. He was the guy who certainly introduced the Epic Pass. I don't know if it was his idea, but you wrote a brilliant post that I read about what should be on Rob's to-do list. And I just want to pick out one phrase from this, which I think, you see this kind of thing in all of your writing, but you mentioned about the $328 walk-up ticket in Park City. In that article, you talk about walk-up lift ticket prices that would embarrass a luxury handbag store. That just amused me so much. So tell me, what should be on Rob Katz's to-do list? How should he start off? What would your advice if he were to listen to what you had to say?
Well, Rob has been on the podcast, so I'm hoping to get him on again. He'll do most of the talking, but nonetheless, my questions will be framed around what I think Vail should be doing. But the number one thing is they have to make Vail the best everywhere, because right now it simply is not. The company grew very, very quickly. It more than doubled in size by number of resorts over just a couple of year span from 2017-ish to 2019. And as Vail solidified the strategy of buying markets, right? So I told you they bought those little areas around Detroit, Chicago, these big cities. I think that they did a good job with those ski areas at first, Afton, Alps, Minnesota, Wilmot, Wisconsin, Mount Brighton, Michigan. When they bought them in bunches, so they bought 4 in Ohio, 1 in Indiana, 2 in Missouri. They, with all in one big scoop, I think they started to take those markets for granted and say, oh, we have these mountains. They're the only mountains there. Ohio only has 5 public ski areas and Vail owns 4 of them. And it's a flat place. It's a populous place. in the middle of the country, but you started to see truncated seasons. You started to see less snowmaking than you would at competing independent resorts whose entire reputation in business is based upon the success of that one resort. What Vail started to do was say, weather's kind of warm. We're not going to make snow because it's going to melt then. And that compromises their brand name. And I'll give you one example to really highlight this. In northern New Hampshire, around a town called North Conway, there's 4 ski areas: Attitash, Wildcat, Black Mountain, and Cranmore. Traditionally, Black Mountain has been the dog. It's been the first to close. It hasn't had good snowmaking. Vail bought Wildcat and Attitash. Wildcat was always traditionally the last to close. It would close sometimes in May, and it did this for 20, 25 years. Faces north, it's right across from Mount Washington. Great hill. So after several years, Vail bought it in 2019. So fast forward to 2025, Vail owns Wildcat, and the Indy Pass actually purchased Black Mountain, New Hampshire. So Wildcat, which faces north, closed first week in April. Black Mountain, which faces south and has a lower base elevation, stayed open into May. I cannot underscore how hard that is to do. The base elevation of Black Mountain is something around 1,500 feet. That's like 500 meters. So it's a sign. It's symbolic of what Vail has done throughout its portfolio outside of the West. In the West, they still tend to do a pretty good job. They've really not aggressively, assertively put the resources in that they need to make that mountain the best in its market. When you go to a Vail resort, you know that you're getting the best experience possible.
Yeah, and you said when you were on the podcast before, you referred to the Indy Pass just then, and these, different competitors they didn't have to start off with. Maybe they've lost ground to them as well. I see that Rob Katz has given at least one press conference already. I did also see your post as a response, which is titled, "Wait, there's a limit to what people will pay to ski 7 hours on a Tuesday in a highly competitive market," which refers to those walk-up prices and things like that. And yeah. I want to quote one line from that blog post. That is, I might have to beat this, but what I wish he'd said: "Man, did we F that one up? We got arrogant. We got foolish. We acted as though prices could just climb and climb forever." And that's kind of how it was, as far as I can see from what you're saying to us.
Yeah, it was. The walk-up lift ticket prices at many Vail resorts last year. I'll just read you a few. On peak days, Beaver Creek was $329, Breckenridge $299, Keystone $292, Vail Mountain $329. Those are just their core 4 in Colorado. If you go back to before the Epic Pass, the 2007 to 8 season, the lift ticket prices at those same ski areas were $92 for Beaver Creek, $83 for Breck, $83 for Keystone, and $92 for Vail Mountain. So that's something like a 200% increase, more than that, in just a 15-year period, or I guess closer to a 20-year period. But it's way past inflation. And what you see when you really start to dig into the competitors' prices, Colorado is a very dense ski market. It's one of the densest we have as far as number of ski areas competing with one another, is that you see their competitors doing very creative things. Ski Cooper, a small ski area near Vail, for example, was started off for $45 lift tickets during the week. Copper Mountain, which is a huge mountain, actually, the same size as Keystone or Breckenridge, right across the street from them, is offering $99 Thursdays. Whereas if you go to Vail's website, even in advance, they were charging over $200 for one day of skiing, which actually, the $300 lift ticket, if I'm being honest, it makes sense on a powder day on a Saturday. Okay, because you do need some way to meter people. But does it make sense on a Tuesday in January when it hasn't snowed in a week? No. And Vail Resorts, one of the points in their earnings call was that lift ticket revenue was down, and they seemed very surprised by this. And it's like, guys, look around. Yes, everyone else has followed you up with these peak prices at the peak resorts, but they're also looking at these softer periods and taking advantage of that to steal business from you.
Well, that's very interesting. I love to see how markets work. Thinking of skiing across the whole of the state, I know that you have so much information in you that I'd love to extract. But while I was looking around your Substack, I noticed a couple of other posts which really caught my attention in there. I'm just going to ask you about them now. I don't know how much time we'll have to go into detail, but skiing in states like Tennessee and Mississippi. I had a look on the map. I was trying to work out like where these mountains are, how it's
Yeah.
possible. You did this, right? I'm not imagining it.
So I'll clarify. So the post was skied on Mississippi. So the Mississippi River runs from Minnesota at the north of the country all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. I hope I don't get kicked out of the country for saying that. The section of the Mississippi that I skied along was along the Illinois-Iowa border. It's very dramatic. You ski down into this broad river. It's very beautiful. It's one of the most famous rivers. Mark Twain wrote all about it. It was central to a lot of his fiction. Tennessee is impressive. So in the southern United States, in the southeast United States, we actually have quite a few ski areas because there's a high elevation plateau down there in the Appalachian Mountains. So you get about 4,000 feet. To give you context, the highest base in New England, where our best skiing is on the East Coast, is at about 2,200 feet. So these are quite a bit higher. So even though you're south, places like North Carolina, Tennessee, they still, with snowmaking, are able to have long seasons. The Tennessee, there's one ski area in Tennessee over Gallenberg. It's at about 4,000 feet base, and they were able to have over 100-day ski season this year, which is super impressive for that part of the country. The most unlikely, there's no ski areas in the state of Mississippi. However, there is one next door in the state of Alabama that opens about every other year or so. It's small. It has a rope tow. It's 100 and some vertical feet and hardly gets any natural snow, but they get overnight periods where they can make snow and open for 2 to 6 days a year every other year. And this was a year when they opened. I've never skied there.
I love that. I love those stories. And it's so interesting, if you have altitude, generally there will always be some opportunity to ski. Over in Europe, many people, in the UK and across Europe would be surprised to know that you can ski in Greece. Covered it on the podcast before. Sicily, where I went earlier this year, Corsica, southern Spain, Sierra Nevada actually had weirdly quite good snow this year. And Lebanon, if you want to go to the other side, Turkey, lots of skiing over there. There's a lot of skiing. I mean, in fact, I've skied in Morocco now. I think about it. Wherever it's high enough, you will get snow eventually. So that's really interesting, Stuart. Thanks so much for that. And be really interested to follow what goes on with that Vail Resort journey. So I'm sure, hopefully, we'll be able to have you on the show again at some point down the track. Right, we're just going to move towards the close now. I always enjoy listener feedback. I love to hear what you think about the show, what you like and what you don't like. So just leave me a comment on Spotify or Instagram, on Facebook. Our handle is @theski-podcast, or you can send me an email to theski-podcast@gmail.com. Now, we heard from Guy earlier in his snow report from New Zealand. When he first got in contact, he said, I really enjoy the podcast. It helped me prepare for my trip to Big Sky and Grand Targhee in late January. And that's episode 235 when Stuart was last on the show. And now there are 263 episodes of the Ski Podcast to catch up with. 123 of those are listened to in the last week. If you enjoyed this episode, why not go to theskipodcast.com, have a search around the tags and categories, and you're bound to find something of interest to keep your love of snow ticking over the summer. In the last week, just over half of our listeners were in the UK, about 15% in the States. And I noticed that our Australia listeners more than doubled after our recent Down Under episode. Everyone else is spread as far and wide as South Africa, Mexico, and Hong Kong. You can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at Ski Podcast. You can also follow us on WhatsApp. Look in the show notes for that link. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to help us, there are 3 things you can do. You can follow us or subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can give us a review on Apple Podcasts or leave a comment on Spotify. Plus, you are very welcome to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/The Ski Podcast. It's always appreciated. Now, just looking ahead, our next episode is going to be slightly different. It's a one-off special. I'm going to be looking at the rise and fall of one of the UK's biggest ever ski companies, Bladen Lines. In the mid-80s, they were the largest chalet operator in the Alps, but by the mid-90s, they no longer existed. Now, I haven't quite finished it yet. It's a massive editing job. There are over 100 separate bits of audio to slot into place. It's generally been a labour of love that has taken me a stupid amount of time, but I think you'll understand why it's been worth it when you listen. I speak with people who were there at the time and go right to the heart of what went right in their eyes and why it went wrong at the end. So watch out for that one going live in your podcast feeds in 2 weeks' time on the 25th of July. Another reason to subscribe. But for now, I would like to thank my guest today, Sam. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me in. Thank you.
And Stuart, thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Come back anytime.
Excellent. Enjoy the rest of your day. And finally, listener, thank you for joining us wherever in the world you're listening right now. And until next time, goodbye.